Comrades and friends, and everyone who has joined us for this meeting, I am just saying from the chair that we will start the meeting in a few moments' time. We are just allowing for getting all the participants in the waiting room who are wanting to come into the meeting to join us. So in 2 to 3 minutes, we will start the meeting. Comrades and friends, we are still letting people into the meeting. Those of you who are in at the moment, you will have noticed that the chat is open. Please do feel free to put greetings into the chat. We'll start in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, comrades and friends joining us from Britain and from across the world. I'm Liz Payne and I'm chair of the Communist Party of Britain, and it's a very great privilege to me to be able to chair this event this afternoon. We are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China and the fantastic contribution that that party has made over the past 100 years to the development of humanity, both in China and across the world. We are particularly pleased to welcome our comrades from Beijing, joining us from the International Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. You are all very welcome. I would particularly like to welcome Comrade Ms. Wang Yingchun, who is the Deputy Director General of the department, with a particular responsibility for affairs concerned with Britain and a number of other areas of the world. Thank you so much. We are also being joined by comrades Mr. Yan Mufeng, Ms. Pan Yiping, Ms. Zhang Yun, and Ms. Wang Xitian. Thank you very, very much, comrades. It is quite late in China, I know, and we are very, very appreciative of your joining us on this occasion and of the contribution, and also of all the help that you have given us in being able to set up this meeting. We have been with you on a number of occasions recently, as the celebrations have moved forward. It has been a great pleasure and a joy, and we thank you for your invitation to us to join you on those occasions. And we are very, very happy this afternoon that you can join us here. Thank you also to the other speakers that we have on our platform. We have our General Secretary, Comrade Rob Griffiths. We have Comrade Ian Inglis, who lives in China and is going to tell us something about that, and our Comrade Kenny Coyle. We're also very delighted to have with us Jenny Clegg, who is a specialist in China studies and a prolific writer on China. I will introduce each in turn. We're also very, very delighted to have on our platform, of course, our International Secretary, John Foster. And I'd like to thank John very, very much for all the help he's given and support in setting up this meeting. So without further ado, I'm going to move to our General Secretary in just one moment, who is going to pay tribute to the Communist Party of China on this anniversary occasion. Before I do, can I say, please do feel free to put greetings in the chat. Also, if you have any questions, we are monitoring the chat. There will be no time for open discussion in this meeting, but we have the chat monitored, and we will try to answer anything that you ask. Everything is being recorded, so of course we can come back and revisit it. The meeting is being streamed on our party's YouTube, Twitter and Facebook, and you will be able to access the recording through the website. We also have administration in the background, which is adding information and links and references in the chat as we proceed. So everyone, very, very welcome. And I'm now going to give the floor to our General Secretary, Rob Griffiths. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you very much, Liz. And on behalf of the Communist Party of Britain, our Executive Committee and our party members, I want to pay tribute to the Communist Party of China, its 90 million and more members, to its Central Committee, and to Comrade Xi Jinping, the General Secretary. Comrades, it's a great honour to pay this tribute, because we know that the Communist Party of China is, above all else, and has been, a party of mass struggle, a party of enormous sacrifices, a party of heroic struggles for the national sovereignty and independence of their country, the struggle against the right-wing Kuomintang nationalist forces in the 20s, 30s and 40s, in the struggle against foreign occupation by the imperialist powers and then by the Japanese occupation forces in the 1930s and 1940s. The heroic episode, of course, of the Long March of 1934, 1935, the struggles of the CPC during the Second World War, and then the war for national sovereignty and the construction of socialism against the nationalist forces in the 1940s, which culminated, of course, in the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1949. That, of course, brought no peace, because we then had the imperialist war in Korea, and it was the intervention of the People's Liberation Army that threw back the forces of American and British and Australian and other imperialist powers and fought them to a standstill, helping to bring the Korean War to an end. But it's not the case that the heroic age of China and the Chinese Communist Party ended back then, because then there were the great challenges of reconstruction, of pulling a society out of feudalism and into a long period of modern development. I've been rereading recently the new edition of Alan Willington's book, The Slaves of the Cool Mountains. Alan Willington was a journalist for the Daily Worker who spent a long period in China, and he witnessed in the 1950s the enormous mass campaigns to put an end to slavery, to bring emancipation to women, and to spread mass literacy and numeracy. It's still a marvelous book today. I would recommend it to anybody. And I don't say that as somebody who's on a commission from the publishers. And those mass campaigns and those mass struggles haven't ended, because in recent decades, of course, we've seen the eradication of poverty, of absolute poverty, lifting 850 million people or more out of extreme poverty in China. And that doesn't come about purely through government edict or decrees from the center. The Chinese Communist Party was mobilized in many, many hundreds of thousands of communities across China to identify and then help to eradicate poverty. And then most recently, of course, we've seen the campaign to defeat COVID in China. And once again, that wasn't simply a question of diktats coming from above. The whole of Chinese society, and at the core of that, the whole of the Chinese Communist Party, was mobilized on a massive scale to defeat the pandemic in their country. Throughout many of these struggles, the Communist Party in Britain has stood in solidarity with our Chinese comrades. The Hands Off China campaign in the mid-1920s, the visit of our founder member, a legendary figure in the British trade union movement, the visit of Tom Mann and his delegation from the Red International of Labour Unions to Wuhan and Hong Kong, Shanghai in 1927, again strengthened the links between the communists of Britain and the communists of China. I say there's a long history of solidarity. We don't have to pretend that we always agreed on every question of international significance. But even when the two parties have disagreed, we have tended and succeeded by and large to keep those disagreements on a rational and even a comradely level. And today, as we stand shoulder to shoulder with the Chinese Communist Party against this new Cold War that's been launched by the imperialist powers. We're very clear why we take that stance. China has utilized some of the mechanisms of developed capitalism. We understand that. Lenin did the same in the 1920s in Russia. But China is still fundamentally a socialist country. Key sectors of the economy are in different forms of social ownership. The economy is centrally planned, and the Chinese Communist Party is in power. So we are in no doubt at all that the Chinese Communist Party remains on the trajectory of building a humane, peaceful, harmonious socialist society, a fully developed socialist society, and what spectacular steps they are taking towards that goal. I would also just say, for those who may not be aware of the extent to which the Chinese Communist Party has come to play a leading role in the organized international communist movement. There was a long period, of course, there were differences with the Soviet Union and other socialist parties. There was a long period of difference and even division in the international communist movement. That was brought to an end quite decisively some decades ago. But what we have seen since then is the very, very encouraging advance made by the Chinese party to play a bigger and bigger role in the international communist movement. But always, and I think this should be emphasized, always on the basis of strict equality and mutual respect between the different communist parties. We are a relatively small party in the international communist movement. But I have to say that our Chinese comrades treat us with the same warmth, the same comradeship, the same sensitivity, the same considerations as they do every other communist party, regardless of its size. I'll just finish by saying, on a personal note, I've been very fortunate having the honour to be General Secretary of the Communist Party of Britain. I've been very fortunate to be able to visit China some 6 or 7 times in recent years. I've seen for myself the enormous world historic changes that are taking place in that country and its society and that are still going on today. I also know this. While it's not essential to go to a country to know anything about it, I never went to apartheid South Africa. I'm too young, believe it or not, to ever have been around when Nazi Germany was still in existence. But we know enough from different sources, not just from our own comrades in those countries. We know enough from a wide range of sources that these were deeply reactionary, inhumane societies that had to be brought to an end. And whilst it's not essential necessarily to go to China to know a little bit about that country, I would say to everybody, before you swallow the propaganda that comes from the Western media, please make every effort to read about China and learn about China from a wider range of sources. I will close with one anecdote. We have a big campaign underway to try and portray China as being engaged in genocide against the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province. I went to the Xinjiang province. I went with 3 comrades from our party. We went to the capital city of Urumqi. We walked around that city unaccompanied. We went to the markets. We saw people chatting. We went to the mosques. We saw public life taking place there. And what was very noticeable was that everywhere we went, we heard the Uyghur language. The officials we met, the party officials and the municipal officials, most of them were Uyghurs and their first language was Uyghur. Our translators from Beijing had to stand down because they couldn't understand the Uyghur language. All the public notices and road signs and so on were in Uyghur first, followed by Han Chinese and sometimes by Russian, because of the small Russian minority community that's existed there for many decades. When we got back to Britain, within a week or 2, I opened a copy of The Guardian. I don't make that mistake these days, but I opened a copy of The Guardian, and I read of a speech at the European Parliament by the so-called president of the so-called World Uyghur Congress, and he told the MEPs that the Uyghur language in Xinjiang province was banned, that all the officials, party and state officials, were Han Chinese and therefore didn't even speak the Uyghur language, and that all public notices were in Han Chinese only because the Uyghur language had been outlawed. The four of us had just been there. We had just seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears. The Uyghur language was everywhere. The top officials were Uyghur people. So I would say this, without making any comment about the position in Xinjiang today, please don't necessarily believe a word that you read in the Western press or hear from the Western broadcasting media. Please don't believe a word that you hear from them automatically. Check other sources, because you may find, as we found, that the situation is fundamentally different to the one that's portrayed here in the West. Anyway, enough from me. I'm looking forward very much to the contributions from the other speakers, because I know that some of them know far more about China and the record of the Chinese Communist Party than I do. But I'm delighted to express our congratulations to our Chinese comrades on this auspicious occasion.
General Secretary, thank you very, very much for those words and for the sentiments that you've expressed on behalf of the Executive Committee and every member of the Communist Party of Britain. I'm going to move directly now to the contribution of Comrade Ms. Wang Yingchun. We are so very, very grateful to see you here, very privileged to hear you. Comrade is the Deputy Director General of the International Department of the Communist Party of China. We have met her on a number of occasions at the present time in our relations with the Communist Party of China and in our celebrations of the 100th anniversary. And I want to thank the Communist Party of China through her for all the invitations and the work that we are able to do together. Also, I said that we had met her many times in the immediate period in the run-up to this meeting, but we of course also knew her when she was posted in London at the embassy. It's fantastic to have you here again, and I'm going to ask you now, please, to deliver your contribution. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Comrades from the CPB and friends, first, many thanks to the warm introduction by Chair Comrade Liz and the important and inspiring contribution by General Secretary Comrade Robert. It's always a pleasure to see CPB friends, old or new, in person or online. I would like to express our heartfelt appreciation to the CPB for hosting this important event, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China, and for your kind invite. In particular, I would like to thank you for your warmest messages of congratulations on the centenary of the CPC, and for your attendance and the strong support in a series of events hosted by the IDCPC this year, including the most recent CPC and World Political Leaders Summit. It is fair to say that it is your contribution that made these events more successful. Comrades and friends, as we celebrate the 100th birthday of the CPC, it is a great opportunity to look back on the past journey and look ahead to the future. In the past 100 years, the CPC has been adapting Marxism to the Chinese context, and the capability of our party and the strength of socialism with Chinese characteristics are attributable to the fact that Marxism works. One defining feature of Marxism is people nature. As a Marxist party, we believe this country is its people and the people are the country. So upholding the party's fundamental purpose of wholeheartedly serving the people, the CPC practices a people-centered philosophy to bring earth-shaking changes to the fate of Chinese people and improve their well-being. Since day one, the Chinese communists, represented by Comrade Mao Zedong, have committed to striving for the Chinese people's well-being. From 1921 to 1949, the CPC led Chinese people in new democratic revolution and established the People's Republic of China. We thus ripped the tag, the sick man of East Asia, off and stood up in front of the world. For the first time, the Chinese people become the masters of the country. In the following years, the CPC led Chinese people in socialist revolution and construction and laid down the political, institutional, and material fundamentals needed to build a better life for the people and realize national rejuvenation. Even though I myself didn't live its history, I heard elder generations often saying that it's the CPC that brought them from the old world to the new world, a world that they will never be oppressed. Indeed, I think this is why our party is always able to win people's heart. Just as Comrade Mao Zedong once said, if we cannot make a difference for the lives of our people, then we won't be able to sustain power. We will lose ground. We will fail. After the third plenary session of the 11th CPC Central Committee in 1978, the CPC reviewed China's own experience of building socialism, studied the practice of other countries in their development, and launched reform and opening up. As Comrade Deng Xiaoping pointed out, if we do not develop the economy and improve people's lives, we will end up in a dead end. This pioneering decision was a trailblazer of socialism with Chinese characteristics, which in turn enabled the country to achieve greater economic, science, and technological and comprehensive national strength and better life for the people. I myself was born in 1970s, the starting era of the reform and opening up. I recall that when the first special economic zone was set up in Shenzhen, the whole country was abuzz. Today, Shenzhen has developed from a small fishing village to a metropolis with over tens of millions of population. Local people have turned their life around for the better in an unimaginable way. Reform and opening up has transformed the Chinese people's fortune. After years of efforts, socialism with Chinese characteristics has entered the new era. Faced with the new situation, what kind of socialism in the new era should we uphold, and how to adhere to and develop it? Since the 18th National Congress, the CPC Central Committee, with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, has led Chinese people in bringing about fundamental changes and make all-dimensional and groundbreaking achievements in the course of the party and the country. China has realized the first centenary goal of building a moderately prosperous society in all respects, and brought about a historic resolution to absolute poverty in China. The per capita GNI has exceeded $10,000 and the people's livelihood has seen significant improvement. China is running the world's largest social security scheme, with basic health insurance covering over 1.3 billion people and basic pension insurance covering about 1 billion. Average life expectancy has risen from 35 in 1949 to more than 77 now. With all the efforts, China is making big strides towards building an all-round modern socialist country, and Chinese people are having a stronger sense of happiness fulfillments, and security. At the height of the COVID-19 epidemic, when an 87-year-old COVID patient in Wuhan was admitted into a local hospital, the hospital set up a special treatment team and assigned about 10 medical workers to look after him for dozens of days. He was finally cured and discharged from hospital. I can recall what General Secretary Xi Jinping said about this story. He said, "How do we define put people first? With so many people looking after one patient, this is putting people first, whatever the cost is." Comrades and friends, throughout the past 100 years, the CPC has remained committed to peaceful development and worked tirelessly to uphold world peace and stability. The Chinese nation cherishes peace, amity, and harmony, values that have been honored and carried forward throughout history. The CPC has written on its flag the faith in peace, development, and win-win cooperation. From actively promoting an international united front against fascism during the war of resistance against Japanese aggression, to adopting an independent foreign policy of peace after the founding of New China, and from putting forward the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence to accurately identifying peace and development as the theme of our times. The CPC has unremittingly pursued the path of peaceful development. It has remained committed never to seek hegemony, territorial expansion, or spheres of influence, and has achieved development by upholding world peace and promoted world peace through its own development. First, under the leadership of the CPC, China will continue to stay committed to the path of peaceful development. We do not carry aggressive and hegemonic traits in our genes. The Chinese people, after suffering tremendously from foreign aggression and colonialism in modern times, and having eventually regained independence and liberation, would by no means bring the same suffering to people of other countries. China adheres to an independent foreign policy of peace. China's development won't pose threat to anyone, but will only bring more development opportunities to the world. As a global force for peace, China so far has dispatched a total of over 50,000 peacekeepers to the UN peacekeeping missions, making it the largest troop contributing country among the permanent members of the UN Security Council. On the journey ahead, we will remain committed to promoting peace, development, cooperation, and mutual benefit, and continue to work with all peace-loving countries and peoples to promote the shared human values of peace, development, fairness, justice, democracy, and freedom. Second, under the leadership of the CPC, China will continue to make new contributions to shared development of all countries. As General Secretary Xi Jinping points out, development holds the key to people's well-being. On the road to the well-being of all mankind, no country or nation should be left behind. All countries and nations are equally entitled to development opportunities and rights to development. For example, China has made special contribution to global poverty reduction cause. So far, all the 99 million rural residents living below the current poverty line in China have been lifted out of poverty. That means we have met the poverty reduction target set out in the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development 10 years ahead of schedule. On the journey ahead, we need to enable all countries to step up development cooperation and jointly oppose the practice of seeking technology blockade and divide, as well as decoupling. We stand ready to work with the international community to improve global connectivity and promote high-quality development of the Belt and Road Initiative, so that more countries and peoples will be able to share the fruits of development. Third, under the leadership of the CPC, China will continue to work to build a human community with a shared future. As General Secretary Xi said at the CPC and World Political Parties Leaders Summit, we stand ready to work with the international community to ensure more countries and peoples to share the fruits of development. Let us make even greater contributions to the buildings of a community with a shared future and that of a better world. For example, one of the most urgent tasks of the world now is to speed up efforts to build a great war of immunization and secure an early victory against COVID-19. Since the outbreak of the pandemic, China has done its best to provide over 500 million doses of vaccine to nearly 100 countries, even though the domestic supply is quite tight. We did that because we take it as our responsibility to contribute to the shared good of all countries of the world. The origin tracing of the coronavirus is a serious matter of science in nature, and it is a collective responsibility of all countries and should be carried out worldwide. China has taken part in relevant international cooperation in an open and transparent way, and has, on the basis of rigorous analysis and study, released a joint report on the origins of the virus with the World Health Organization. On this particular question, we must firmly reject any attempt to politicize, label, or stigmatize the virus. We must support medical experts and scientists in tracing the origins of the virus in multiple countries, regions, and locations in the spirit of professionalism, so that we could truly gain experience needed to prevent the next pandemic. We are very grateful of the CPB to agree to sign the joint statement opposing politicization of origin tracing of the coronavirus. We highly commend this gesture of solidarity and friendship. Comrades and friends, as we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the CPC, comrades from the CPB must be as proud as we are. As you just celebrated the 100th anniversary of the founding of Communist Party in Britain last year, the CPC values very much the long and enduring friendship between our two parties. We understand and support each other on a raft of issues and are committed to address the common challenges facing the world together. Going forward, we remain committed to deepen exchanges and cooperation with the CPB, working together for the continuous development of the international communist movement and an open, inclusive, clean, and beautiful world with lasting peace, universal security, and common prosperity. Thank you very much.
Comrade, thank you very, very much. Were we in the physical room with you at the moment, we would all be on our feet, giving you and the Communist Party of China a standing ovation. Thank you so much for everything that you have said, what you have explained to us, your review of the historical record of the contribution that you have made to the development of the Chinese people and of humanity, and for your pledge that development can go hand in hand with peace, and everything that you are going to do in the future to ensure that that happens. We, of course, absolutely reject the Cold War that is being brewed to oppose what you are doing and what you have just described. Cold War and hot war does nothing whatsoever for any working people across the world. It only benefits the huge companies and the big business. So thank you for what you have said. Congratulations to your party. And we're now going to move to watch some film footage that is from your archives. Thank you very much for finding that for us. And it is about the 100 years of the party. It lasts about 5 minutes, just a little less than 5 minutes. Thank you.
In 1901, the Qing authorities were forced to sign another unequal treaty, the Boxer Protocol. The Boxer Protocol marked a new low. China had now sunk to both semi-feudal and semi-colonial status. Countless Chinese people struggled to save the nation and its people. The success of the Russian Revolution of October 1917 introduced an ideological alternative, Marxism. Li Dajiao published a series of articles. He predicted that one day the communist banner would fly over the whole world. On May 4th, 1919, a nationwide patriotic movement was born, the May 4th Movement.
五四运动以后啊，当时随着中国社会的内部就出现了一批接受了马克思主义的先进分子，这样的这个成立中国共产党的问题呢，就提到议事日程上来了。
By August 1920, the first practical step had been taken. A Communist Party organization had been established in Shanghai, with Chun Du-xiu as secretary. In October, Li Dajiao established a Communist Party organization in Beijing. Facilitated by the newly founded party organizations in Shanghai and Beijing, other communist entities emerged in cities such as Changsha, Wuhan, Guangzhou and Jinan. Following suit, Chinese intellectuals and students in Japan and France formed similar organizations. Number 76, Xingye Road, Shanghai, a historic building of global significance. Here, 100 years ago, a remarkable gathering took place. The first ever National Congress of the Communist Party of China. During this first National Congress, several important decisions were made. Communist Party of China confirmed as the party's name, and Socialism and Communism specified as its goals. The founding of the Communist Party of China marked the beginning of a revolutionary new chapter in the history of the Chinese nation. The birth of the Communist Party in China would bring about the fulfillment of the Chinese Revolution.
Okay, thank you very much for showing that. The beginnings, and now we're going to move through the history and to the present, and we move straight to Comrade Kenny Coyle. Comrade Kenny Coyle needs little introduction, I think, to most of you, but just to say that he was formerly the General Secretary of the Young Communist League. He is also a former International Secretary of our party. He is currently on our International Commission as part of the group with responsibility for the affairs of Asia, and is a prolific writer on China. Kenny is joining us from Macau. He joins us so very often that we forget how very far away he is, but very close in comradeship. Kenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Liz. Comrades, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. A number of comrades have touched on many points which I will try and maybe just highlight, since they're relevant to the discussion about China and the CPC, socialism and the world balance of forces, which I was asked to talk about. I think the first point we need to remember is that the Communist Party of China has accumulated more experience in its 100 years than we might think in terms of its ruling and its governing abilities and experience. We think perhaps only of the period from 1949 onwards, the establishment of the People's Republic of China. But as was mentioned by other comrades, and Rob mentioned particularly, in the 1920s and the 1930s and in the 1940s, the CPC had already experience of liberated zones. It had experience of working in the first and the second United Front and coalitions with the Kuomintang. So this is a party that has accumulated an enormous amount of experience. And I think it's one of the weaknesses of the international left that we have often ignored or not paid enough attention to the history of the CPC. So I think it's a very important initiative taken by our party. I'm going to start really by saying something which is very obvious, I suppose, which is that China has literally as well as metaphorically reshaped the world in which we now live. Since the Industrial Revolution, two English-speaking capitalist countries, the United Kingdom and the United States, were in turn the largest and most dominant economies on the global stage. And now China is about to displace the United States to become the world's largest economy. And in fact, according to some calculations, China has already done that. And between now and the next milestone, which is going to be 2035, China is targeted to double its economy over the next 14 years. So its growth has nowhere near petered out or run aground, as some Western commentators have continually attempted to make out. And I think, in fact, the speed with which China's growth has happened is one of the reasons why the West, in a sense, has been taken unaware by China's rise. And it's probably explains the very panicky responses in Washington and in London and in Brussels as a reflection of how ill-prepared they have been for China's rise. In 1954, Mao Zedong estimated that it would take 10 five-year plans or 50 years for China to catch up with the British economy, which at that time was still a major industrial and manufacturing power. And it's true, 50 years later, China matched the UK's GDP. Now, in itself, that's an amazing achievement. But what's more amazing is that within the next 5 years, China's economy was twice the size of the United Kingdom. And today it's about 6 times the size of the United Kingdom. So China is adding the equivalent of the entire British economy approximately every 4 to 5 years. That gives an idea of the extent to which the balance of economic forces globally is being completely transformed. The IMF estimated that in 1978, China's share of world GDP was just around 5%. Today, it's about 18 to 19%. And by the end of 2035, it's estimated that China will account for about 25 to 30%, between a quarter and almost 1/3 of the entire economic activity of the planet. That gives a sense of just how momentous this change is, how historical it is. Now, for those of you who can cast their minds back 30 years ago, again, 30 years ago exactly, 1991, after the Gulf War, the American president, George H.W. Bush, promised a US-led New World Order. And today, virtually no one believes that this is a possibility, despite the rhetoric of the Trump and Biden administrations. The talk now isn't so much about a new world order, it's about a new Cold War order. It's about containing China, it's about isolating China. It's about confrontation on a whole series of fronts: military, diplomatic, ideological, propaganda, trade wars, tariffs, sanctions, and even threats to scientific and cultural links. It's incredible that we have gone from a stage of misrepresenting China, misunderstanding China, to now this, this great fear. Ignorance always breeds fear. It's very important that the communists in China and Britain are able to counteract this ignorance. One of the ways that we can do that best, I think, is by looking at what Comrade Wang mentioned earlier of socialism with Chinese characteristics. Because it was assumed that when China opened up in 1978, when the economic reforms begun, that China would simply be engulfed by foreign capitalism, and that within no time at all, there would be nothing left of China's socialism or the Communist Party of China. And it would be, the country would be fully integrated and subordinated into a global capitalist economy. And yet what we see now is that it's precisely the Western imperialist powers that are seeking to limit and to stop China's international integration by blocking or severing trade links, rejecting Chinese technology, and so on. Now, one of the reasons for China's rise is because, I think for two reasons really. The first is because they applied Marxism to their own situation. They understood that China was only in the primary stage of socialism, that the kind of economic structures that had existed in some other socialist countries and had existed in China previously too weren't really adequate. They didn't recognize the rather undeveloped economic base of China. And that the primary stage of socialism meant an opening up to the global economy in a very structured, in a very gradual, in a very determined, and in a very deliberate way. Not simply opening the doors to foreign capital or to foreign expertise, but a very strategically planned approach to developing certain segments of the economy, certain industrial sectors above all else, and certain regions within China to begin with. This is a great testament, I think, to the advantage of the CPC's political approach to Marxism. The second factor, I think, is the concept within the idea of China with socialism, China with socialist characteristics, socialism with Chinese characteristics, I should say, and the idea of the primary stage of socialism is the idea of a socialist market economy, which other comrades mentioned. And it's because China has maintained this socialist core to its economy. I'll give you one statistic. The entire
assets of China's state-owned enterprises are 2.5 times the size of the assets of the entire UK economy. That gives the Chinese government and the CPC an enormous strategic weapon, an enormous advantage when it comes not only to developments happening within China domestically, but it also gives China a great strength when it comes to its international trade and its international development. And it's for that reason, of course, that the destruction of the socialist sector, the privatization of the state-owned enterprises has always been one of the main demands of Western imperialist powers. It's precisely this state sector that gives China gives the Chinese economy its backbone, which is very, very important for how the other parts of China's economy develop. It's one of the reasons why China has been able to rise step by step into this economic powerhouse without the expansionism, the empire building, the colonialism that characterized the rise of Britain and the United States. So what we have to do, I think, in the international left and in the British left, not just communists, but all other left forces, is try not only to see the opportunities that have been given to the Chinese people by China's rise, but to see the many opportunities that open up as China's increasing strength on the global stage allows left forces to take advantage of an emerging balance of forces, which is very different from the one that has existed for the past few decades, and to make sure that this new balance of forces works in the interests of peace and socialism. Thank you very much.
Kenny, thank you very much, comrade, for that very profound insight into the developments of the CPC and the contribution that they are able to make to development in China, and particularly where you ended the thoughts about what we should be doing, not as simply as it were the audience and observers of development, but as, in a sense, the custodians of development, international custodians on behalf of the peoples of the world. It is an international struggle, and thank you very much for your contribution. I'm going to move now to Dr. Jenny Clegg. It's great to have you with us, Jenny. Again, many of you are very familiar with Jenny and her contributions and her work. Jenny first visited China, I believe, in the early 1970s. She has had an academic career lecturing in international studies and has been a specialist in China, a prolific writer on China, and we particularly want to note her book, China's Global Strategy Towards a Multipolar World, and that is the theme of Jenny's work, the contribution that China makes to that potential of there being a multipolar world, not a bipolar world. Jenny is on the Council of CND, and she is a supporter of the campaign No to Cold War, and has chaired several of its meetings. Jenny, it's great to have you with us, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself then. And thank you very much for this invitation to participate in this very valuable event. I won't actually be talking so much about a multipolar world. coming later rather than sooner in the panel, one risks repeating what other people have said, but perhaps if I do, perhaps I'll do so in a way that develops points rather than simply repeats them. So, of course, the 100-year history of the CPC is a history of the development of the party's relationship with the people. As China marks this anniversary with the achievement of eradicating extreme poverty, I recall the words of the English historian R.H. Tawney, who in 1932 was famously to describe the condition of the Chinese peasant, the vast majority of the Chinese people, as standing up to his neck in water such that the slightest ripple could drown him. Yet it was even worse than that, as in those pre-revolutionary years, frequent ripples did, in fact, extinguish millions of Chinese lives, not only through actual floods, but also through famine, as the state, drained by the indemnities imposed by the imperial powers, we heard about the Boxer indemnity, the state was unable to maintain any of the traditional protections for the peasants and agriculture. What changed China was the land reforms successfully organized by the CPC, that and the liberation of the country from invasion and domination by foreign powers. And what strikes me most about those early years after 1949 was the rapidity with which the government achieved internal stability after over a century of invasions, interventions, civil wars, and so on. And when I think about the state of Afghanistan or countries in the Middle East, Northern Africa, this achievement seems to me to be all the more remarkable, how quickly things can be solved with the right political direction. Now, land reform, land to the tiller, gave the peasants the means for survival. It didn't solve everything for them, but it gave them hope for the future. It's hard to understand the sheer gratitude that this earned for the party amongst the rural population. And to this day, it's possible to see slogans of thanks in the countryside saying, "Mao gave us land, Deng allowed us to get rich." It was this emotional support for the party that carried the new government through its first few decades. But unable to understand the depth of people's feelings, this was dismissed or misrepresented by the West as a cult of personality. Now, the revolution of 1949 was to establish a people's democracy, setting limits to opposition by the former pro-imperialist and pro-feudal forces. China was democratic in the sense it was able to decide its own course of development, free from the domination of other powers. But in the course of organizing land reform, in particular, the CPC was to learn to develop its own democratic practices. Arguably, Mao's idea of the party involved greater interdependence with the masses than did Lenin's. For Mao, and he was not immune from this himself, the chief error for party leaders was estrangement from the people. Now, Mao's mass line was quite distinct from the voluntarist form of majoritarian democracy that we are led to believe in the West forms the definitive version of democracy. In China, before 1949, in pre-revolutionary times, over 70% of the rural population owned less than 20% of the land and were left farming tiny plots insufficient to meet their needs. So the majority then favoured the complete confiscation of all land and its redistribution on an equal basis. But this couldn't work. It wasn't fair to those peasants who were able to break even or even produce a surplus through their own hard work. So the mass line actually aimed at uniting over 90% of the rural population, poor and middle peasants, against the minority of landlords and rich peasants who lived like parasites off exorbitant rents charged to the poor. So this approach of uniting all who could be united has given rise to a very different idea and practice of democracy in China, which involves minimizing opposition, avoiding alienation of key groups, and where possible, finding compromises to bring those with different interests together in order to achieve a common goal. In this way, the party people practice developed into a system of consultative democracy taking policy forward through close consultation with various classes and sections of the population to keep all on board with China's development goals. Of course, it has not always been plain sailing. After 1979, as we've heard, in a more favourable international climate, China opened up and policies adapted to promote market growth. Economic reforms encouraged the private sector, but inequalities between rich and poor have widened worryingly. A massive working class has come into being with millions of jobs created year on year, and urban areas having extended with new cities and millions of jobs built to absorb the migrants from the countryside. The increasingly urban population, with their rising expectations for material improvements, meant people's feelings towards the CPC became more complex. The party, on the one hand, relaxed controls on the market to cater more to consumer demand, but also adapted organisationally by gearing itself towards greater professionalism and efficiency, and above all, prioritising the fight against corruption. There's still a long way to go and many challenges ahead. More recently, in another new reorientation, probably equivalent to Deng Xiaoping's changes in 1980 with reform and opening up, a socialistic motivated shift has been launched, aiming towards greater economic equality, rural revitalization, cultural development, and environmental and ecological sustainability. Looking ahead to 2030 and beyond to 2049, when China claims to transform into an advanced socialist society, the party has set ambitious targets. Over the next 15 years, it looks to double the average per capita income, to become a global leader in innovation, to turn carbon emissions towards decline. And this not least involves ambitious agenda for education, training and skilling up the workforce, improving health and social welfare, and so on. Now, can this be achieved? Despite or even because of the growth of the private sector, the public sector has also expanded in strength and scope. Party membership has grown, and now party branches are in operation in most workplaces. The ground has been prepared then for further advances, and today the party is finding new energy at the grassroots with community organisers in the urban neighbourhoods, as well as village development workers. In the years ahead, the relationship between the party and the people will surely find new directions, new balances between private and public, between capital and labour, as working class influence grows. And as we look to the future from this vantage point of 100 years, we see how that tiny group of determined, brave young people willing to risk death has grown to lead a major international power, one which is now altering by necessity the wider world conceptions of ruling elites and ordinary people everywhere. China, as Kenny has pointed out, is on course to overtake the US in economic size in a matter of years, if it hasn't done so already. And in another 30 years, it may be double in size again. At any rate, as it seeks further to rebalance openness with self-reliance, China will transform the international dynamics in profound ways. A US-led new Cold War is setting in, yet the pressures of pandemic and climate change cry out for international cooperation. Capitalism is at an impasse. World poverty is worsening. The failures of public health and environmental protection demand socialistic solutions, yet political confusion is widespread. Political parties and groupings are falling apart. China is steadily moving against this grain. Amidst the chaos, the CPC leadership stands out in upholding a system of international relations based on equality, mutual benefit, cooperation, and peaceful coexistence. As the old politics falls apart, unexpected new patterns may emerge. Now, China does not set itself up as the model for socialism, and it doesn't need us to defend it. China will surely survive a new Cold War. The biggest losers in a divided world are we, the people. Countries need to find their own ways forward, and whilst not a model, the experiences of China and the CPC may hold lessons from which others can learn. Setting realistic goals, advancing step by step and identifying stages whilst looking to the long term. picking battles that are winnable, and above all, aligning domestic policies with the overall trend, finding complementarities between national solutions and international cooperation, and adapting to the new multipolarity that China's rise under the CPC leadership is driving forward. Thank you.
Jenny, thank you so very much for that analysis. What an excellent contribution there, and it's so good to hear your perspectives on the lessons that we learn, which are not copying each other's systems, but finding our own ways forward with confidence. I'm really grateful to you. Thank you for that. And I'm going to move now to our last speaker, which is Comrade Ian Inglis, who is joining us from Henan province in China, where he lives. And he's going to tell us something about living and working in China and what that's really like, his perspectives on it. And he's also going to show us a short film that he's made about how China and the Communist Party in China is coping with the COVID crisis. So over to you, Ian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thanks a lot. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's perfect.
Oh, sorry. Okay. 同志们、朋友们，大家晚上好。首先，热烈庆祝中国共产党建党100周年，祝贺你们。Comrades and friends, good evening from China. It is a real pleasure to be invited to join the distinguished panel today to mark the centenary of the Communist Party of China. As a permanent resident of the People's Republic of China of almost 17 years standing, I'd like to try to add a personal slant on today's webinar by giving the benefit of my own experiences of living here. To give a bit of context, I moved to China in September 2004, where I now live with my wife and daughter, who are both Chinese citizens. We live in more or less the most southerly city of China on the tropical island province of Hainan, where I work as a presenter on Hainan television. My contribution this evening will be centered on 4 main points, namely poverty alleviation, environmental protection, the status of women in China, and the government's response to the COVID-19 outbreak. My work for Hainan State Television takes me all around the province and often into far-flung rural places. As such, I've been fortunate enough to witness firsthand the improvements in living conditions of many of its rural inhabitants. Having spoken to a range of people all over the island on this, the response from them has been categorical and unified. Their conditions had improved thanks to the government. A case in point is the mountainous Li ethnic village of Wang in west central Hainan, whose locals have turned their impoverished little backwater into a mountain retreat, offering, among other things, smart new guest houses and ethnic cultural evenings. Or the village of Tangan, located in the central city of Wuzhishan, right next door to the Wuzhishan Revolutionary Base, which has been helped greatly by those wishing to learn more about Hainan's revolutionary history, often referred to in China as red tourism. In many cases, relocation is part of the solution to poverty, such as the Li ethnic minority villages whose inhabitants used to live deep in the forest and were moved to a new site several kilometers away, partly to be nearer amenities, but also in one particular case I encountered, as the government had earmarked their section of forest as a national level nature reserve in a concerted effort to save the critically endangered Hainan gibbon. Environmental conservation and the Chinese Party's genuine desire to protect the environment is not simply empty rhetoric. One of Comrade Xi Jinping's famous phrases has bolstered this policy, and it has become an oft-quoted slogan. 绿水青山就是金山银山, or in English, lucid waters and lush hills are invaluable assets. This is translated here in Hainan into the complete banning of single-use plastics last year, the ceasing of sales of fossil fuel-driven vehicles by 2030, and the massive increase in electric car use, largely thanks to preferential government policies, the rise of agro-tourism, and a whole range of locally inspired grassroots eco-events, in some of which I have been involved, such as beach cleaning and even coral planting. The city of Sanya, where I live, has initiated a refuse separation system and in recent years has completely cleaned up its rivers and beaches. A personal issue that's very close to me, and is the main thing that I'd like to speak about this evening, is the status of women here in the PRC. I should like to try to illustrate the constantly improving situation for women by briefly telling the story of the women in my family. My wife's maternal grandmother, Jiang Guomei, was born into an educated family in what is now China's Chongqing municipality. Her father had been a private tutor and her husband was a man of letters who provided poetic scrolls for community events and ceremonies, such as funerals. Despite this, Jiang Guomei was still unable even to write her own name up until the end of her life. Her exact date of birth was uncertain and she had not had even a day's schooling. Such was the era when education for girls was simply seen as a waste of time, and so she was destined for a life of drudgery. Jiang Guomei gave birth to 3 sons and 1 daughter, the latter being my mother-in-law, in a hut made of mud and wood on a slope around 2 kilometers outside the village of Qinglong in the county of Fengdu, then Sichuan province. Born in June 1960, Zhang Shuqing was the youngest of the children, and great things were not expected of her. Growing up in New China, she theoretically had access to schooling, but was removed from school by her parents at age 12, as there was no hope for an educated girl. This made Zhang Shuqing determined to get back to her classes. After multiple interruptions, Zhang Shuqing finally finished her primary school education at the age of 16. She then sailed through nursing college on a state scholarship, and upon graduating at 21, she was allocated a job as a state employee in the small town of Shetan, proving her parents most definitively wrong. It was here in Shetan that Yuanling, my partner of nigh on 18 years, was given life in 1983 as, of course, the only child of her mother and doctor father, Yu Changxin. Her tales of a shortage-stricken childhood in this out-of-the-way community do not seem to tally with the lives of youngsters, our own daughter included, in today's China. Perhaps ironically to some, the much maligned one-child policy had a decidedly positive effect on both Zhang Shuqing's and Yu Yanling's lives. In keeping with tradition, my father-in-law, Yu Changxin, had really wanted a son and urged Zhang Shuqing to try for a second child in contravention of the law, apparently confident of being able to find some way around the restrictions. Zhang Shuqing was unwilling to bear another child and refused, thus giving her a say over her own body without fear of repercussion. Had Yuanling had a male sibling, it is possible, if not probable, that all of the family's meager resources would have been invested in him, in his education, and in his future, to the detriment of Yuanling's prospects. At age 18, she went to university in far-off Shanghai with the help of an interest-free loan that covered her tuition fees, while she was fortunate enough to be awarded a first-class scholarship of 5,000 Chinese yuan per semester to cover her accommodation and other living expenses. Needless to say, this was open to both male and female students, the gender gap in education, in higher education now having been closed. She went on to study her MA in Shanghai and her PhD in Macau. Meanwhile, a recently divorced Zhang Shuqing, boosted by her newly found freedom, decided to relocate to the county town of Fengdu and secured a job, this time through examination, as head nurse at the mental hospital until her retirement at the age of 55 on a full state pension of approximately £400 a month. In stark contrast to Jiang Guomei, who remained completely illiterate and languishing in poverty until her final days, her daughter had progressed from wooded incline to county seat, from squalid barn with a mud floor to owner of a 120 square meter, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom flat with roof garden. Likewise, her daughter, Yuanling's life experience stands in sharp relief to her own, having progressed from humble beginnings to an upwardly mobile university lecturer and company owner. With these improvements in mind, it is with great optimism and enthusiasm that our daughter Molly advances with People's China into an ever brighter and egalitarian future. The final point I'd like to address, and has been touched upon already this evening, is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is now almost a thing of the past here in the PRC, but still festers on in many places, and the way in which it has been handled here in China. I'd like now to play a short video that I made in conjunction with Hainan state media during the initial lockdown here in March 2020. It includes a few of my observations on the measures that were put in place in my province of Hainan during the height of the pandemic here. And Chair, if you'd be so kind as to play the video. Hello everyone, my name is Ian Ingalls and I'm from Wales in the UK. From the first time that I visited the beautiful tropical city of Sanya in 2007, I knew that this was the place where I wanted to be. Since then, my wife and I have been living here in Hainan. In this short video, I'd just like to share with you some of my experiences during the COVID-19 outbreak. When the outbreak first became apparent, I was a bit concerned, a little bit worried, but I was soon reassured when I saw the measures being implemented by the Chinese authorities. I mean, it's hard to imagine that a whole hospital could be completely built in just 10 days. The organizational capacity of China is absolutely outstanding. Another thing that amazed me was the tens of thousands of medical personnel who chose to go to Hubei to do their bit in helping out Wuhan. I think you'll agree they are the real heroes of this crisis. In the middle of last month, the British government advised all British citizens residing in China to leave as soon as possible. We thought about leaving and we even bought air tickets home, expensive ones at that. But as the situation in China continued to improve, we became more confident that remaining in China would be the right thing to do. We foreigners in China are often called Lao Wai. While we may be foreigners, we're certainly not strangers. During the epidemic, a lot of foreigners in China made their own contributions as a way of showing their friendship and solidarity. When I was on holiday in Laos recently, I managed to buy 300 face masks, which I then donated to the Sanya People's Hospital. My daughter was born in that hospital, so giving the masks to them was very important to me, my small way of repaying some of the kindness that they had shown to me and my family. During the winter holidays, some of my foreign friends and acquaintances from Hainan travelled abroad or went home to spend the holiday with their families. They'd often send me messages asking me what the latest situation on the ground in Hainan was like. I would find out the latest information and advise them on what to do. China is, and for some of us has been for many years, our second home. China has been a great friend to me and to many of my fellow Lao Wais. As the old English adage goes, a friend in need is a friend indeed. During the Spring Festival, I travelled back to Hainan from Laos and was asked to self-isolate at home for 14 days. Many residential compounds in Hainan are under strict control as to who comes and who goes. Public areas such as lifts are being disinfected daily, many with tissues being provided. Being a returnee from overseas, I and others like me were given a letter from the Hainan Provincial People's Government, offering contact details of various government services, as well as what to do should you have any symptoms, which gave me confidence that things here were being closely monitored. The letter even had an English version. All of this makes it clear to me that Hainan is taking the COVID-19 outbreak very seriously and is implementing effective measures. If I want to go out during this period, I have to don my full gear. A face mask is an absolute must. People are joking now that even God needs to wear a face mask these days. Also, if you go out, don't forget to take with you these two very important documents, your entry and exit permit and your Hainan Health QR code. Every time you enter a supermarket or go into a residential compound, you will have to have your temperature taken. Now, to help foreigners, there is even an English version of the Hainan Health QR code, which makes life a lot easier. Nowadays, if you take a taxi in Hainan, you'll see something rather strange inside the car, a piece of protective plastic sheeting, which gives the impression that the driver has been vacuum packed. You'll also have to scan a QR code to register yourself so that your route can be recorded. I try to keep myself updated on the developments of the outbreak. Things are looking a lot better now, but the control measures have not yet been scaled down. I don't go out much now, but my little daughter certainly keeps me busy. Everyone here has made his or her contribution to controlling the spread of the virus simply by staying at home. Now, some of my friends have already gone back to work. Companies have to implement certain measures, such as providing face masks and disinfectant to employees. Canteens provide pre-packaged meals, which employees must eat on their own. And meetings have been replaced by video conferences.
I hope that this short video has given you a better idea of what life has been like here in Hainan during the epidemic. It has certainly made me realise how intimately humanity is connected. I've also been deeply impressed by the ability of the Chinese government and people to act together to control and fight this pestilence. I look forward to the day when we can all remove our face masks and carry on with our lives. And I'm certain that that day is not far off now.
Thank you, Chair. So I feel no need to labour the contrast between how the pandemic has been dealt with here in China and in certain other countries. Suffice it to say that life here has been more or less back to normal since April 2020, with just a handful of isolated cases breaking out here and there since then, and which were swiftly brought back under control. But any success of China's is invariably either downplayed, ignored, scoffed at, or somehow twisted by many Western media news outlets. I'd like here just to urge viewers, and to echo Comrade General Secretary's points earlier, to urge viewers strongly to seek alternative sources of information on China to the mainstream media. The maintenance of the current Western narrative on China, in my view, relies on both its relentlessness on the one hand, but also on the public's relative lack of knowledge about China on the other. In various so-called news reports in recent years, incredibly mundane things have been turned on their heads and have been presented as somehow cruel or repressive. One particular report was made by a well-known British news outlet, which ran a piece on Xinjiang, where a sign, it featured within the report, a sign outside a nursery school, which read, "Please speak Mandarin on the school grounds." And this was intimated to be evidence of the government's repression of Uyghur culture, neglecting to mention the fact that this sign, in this exact wording, 请讲普通话 in Chinese, can be found in public buildings up and down the country, both in areas that are traditionally populated by ethnic minority groups and in those that are predominantly populated by Han Chinese. I mean, Mandarin Chinese itself comprises of many different dialects, many of which are mutually unintelligible, and so the country needs a lingua franca to function. And that lingua franca, of course, is standard Mandarin Chinese. Context is too often conveniently omitted in Western reporting, providing at best a cherry-picked and incomplete version of the facts. In summary, I count myself fortunate to be able to reside here in New China. With the continued developments, there is an ever-increasing sense of hope in the air, especially now in the new era. And this has had a profound effect on me and has encouraged me to stay. And lastly, I'd like to thank the Communist Party of China for making my life and the lives of my family and friends better, and to wish it and all its members all the very best on its 100th birthday. 伟大的中国共产党万岁! Long live the Communist Party of China! 中共英共牢不可破的友谊万岁! Long live the strong friendship between the CPC and the CPB! 国际主义万岁! Long live internationalism! 没有共产党就没有新中国. 谢谢大家. Thank you very much.
Ian, thank you so much. Thank you very much for that insight into your life, the way things go, the way things are done. And of course, I'm looking at the chat as well, and everybody, of course, is drawing attention to the contrast that this brings. What a fantastic educational tool you've given us in both what you've said and the clip that you have shown us. And indeed, as we draw to the close of this meeting today, I think the record of it will be such a useful aid to the political education that we want to give, to deepening an understanding of China and its achievements, and particularly the achievements of the Communist Party of China. And how important this is, because all the stories in the mass media, we know that they are obviously directed against China, trying to create in our minds the idea that China is an enemy, but it goes way beyond that. What the mass media is trying to do, of course, is to tell us that socialism, that trying to find a new and different way, is something terrible, something to be feared, something that doesn't work. Well, comrades and friends everywhere, we know different, don't we? But we have to do something about it. And I think the biggest pledge that we can give on the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China is to pledge that we will go forward to find in our countries and in our communities the way forward to socialism, to make analysis and to understand, but also to stand with, of course, the communist parties across the world and the Communist Party of China in its moving forward into its second century and taking that very special role that has been described here today in development and in peace. So thank you to everyone again. I can't say it in Chinese as Ian has done, but certainly I know that everybody who is here, in our webinar, everyone who is watching on Facebook, YouTube, and everyone who will look at this in the coming days will want to join me in saying congratulations on your 100th anniversary, and absolutely our solidarity in your struggle in the coming 100 years. And we look forward to working with you every step of the way. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our speakers again. And before we go, a very big thank you to those who have helped to organise the meeting. We couldn't have done it without our comrades in Beijing. We couldn't have done it without our International Secretary, John Foster. And we absolutely couldn't have done it without the support of David and Phil, who've been working behind the scenes. Thank you very much indeed. And I was going to say, enjoy the rest of your day. I know for you in China, the day is already gone, but for everyone else, enjoy the rest of your day. Long live the international struggle for peace and socialism. Thank you. Bye-bye.